Good morning. Good morning. Tech issues. I'm still having trouble with the internet. I don't know what's going on. It, for some reason, it will connect through Wi-Fi, but I don't like to do it through Wi-Fi because you get little glitches and interruptions. And so we intentionally have a wired connection for this. And for some reason, our wired connection is not working. Last week, the Wi-Fi wasn't even working. So whatever they fixed, they broke whatever wasn't broke. And you know how that goes. I hope you guys had a blessed Memorial Day weekend. And just thank you for the service for everybody who died in service of this country. What a what an incredible thing to do for people you don't even know, just for love of country. I think that's just amazing. And let's see, why are we not spooling up? There we go. So we went to the lake. We were supposed to leave Friday. We had issues with the trailer hitch, so that we put the bike rack on. So we didn't end up leaving until Saturday afternoon, and then we didn't get back till late on Monday. And so poor Don, God love him, he was just exhausted. But I wanted to show you some pictures. Let me come over here and let me pull them up real quick. Files, there it is. And come down here, pictures. Yes, yes, I said pictures. Lake images. All right. I think I can just see how to do this. Okay, maybe it'll just let me go to the next one. Okay. Screen share. And hi. Window. That one. Share. Add to scene. Okay, so there's a picture of us at the lake on the bikes. We got the e-bikes, so we'd saved and saved for those. And they are amazing. We live in Kentucky, and it is super hilly here. I'm not going to change the dimensions on this. But this is at Cave Run Lake in Salt Lick, Kentucky. And they were great up and down hills. We had terrible storms while we were there, so there was mud on the paved trails, and we did just fine. I got mud on my bike, and I told Don, I said, Don, I got mud on my bike. I'm a BMXer. Not quite, but I'll take it. So let me see. Show you another one. See if that one shows up. I to close that one. Oh, really? I got to share every single one? That's stupid. That's stupid. Windows. This one. This is just this is the walkway or the trail down to the lake. And as you can see, that's super pretty. Let me show you another one because you want to see my vacation slideshow. We'll show you this one. This is just a pretty sailboat on the lake. And it's interesting. It's a small lake. I guess it's not super small, but we do see sailboats out there, which is nice. Super pretty. See if I can make that so you can see it a little better. And then I'll show you a couple of the lake because it's a pretty lake. Hey, come on now. No, this one. Share. As you can see, just gorgeous. I don't know what happened to the picture, but we're doing the best we can. There's going to be tech stuff this morning. I can just tell, but that's the lake. It's super pretty. And Mom probably can't hear me. All right, I'll just end that. Are you sure you want? Yeah. Add to scene. There we go. I don't know what's going on. I'm having a glitchy day. It is what it is. We'll do the best we can. How about that? But good morning. Good morning. Oh, I see we have comments. It was so pretty. And, we camp out. We've got our little truck camper, and it's about perfect for us. It's just the two of us. So it's got a little tiny kitchen in there and a little, it's called a wet bath. So there's the toilet is in in where the shower is, and everything just kind of seals off and you can shower in there. And then it's got a full queen size bed. I think it's a queen. And it has a slide out. So there's a little booth where we can sit and eat, and just was lovely. It was lovely. It was a great weekend for bike riding. It wasn't too hot. And so just all that good stuff. And I wanted to put up Cecil's, or Cecile, I think it's Cecile, prayer answered. Thank you, God. Thank you and your audience for your prayers. From the bottom of my heart, I appreciate your help for this blessing. I am so happy. If you guys don't remember, we were praying for her financial situation to improve, for housing, affordable housing to become available, and for some speech issues that her daughter was having. So I'm so glad to hear we have an answer to prayer there. And if you guys are on the prayer list and you've had an answer to prayer, let me know so I can share that with everybody. But that was about it. We did that this weekend. I think we're going again July 7th through the 12th, and then the baby's coming on the 22nd, I think. So July is going to be a busy month. We'll see how our podcasting goes that month. We'll probably get most of it in. But of course, I do want to go up and be with my daughter and her family and the baby and the kids when that happens. And we're just super excited about that because we were not expecting. What is this? Is this our 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth grandchild? You'd think I could keep that in my head. You'd be wrong, but you'd think I could. All right. I'm so sorry we got a slow start this morning, you guys, but let me go ahead and get our book going here. Hold on. It's going to be one thing. The whole thing is going to fight me today. It's okay. It's okay. Got to go around here. Open it. Close all this. Close. All right. That one. Look there. I'm figuring it out. I'm not totally new at this. You never know. Okay, let me make sure. Yes, you can see. Goodness. All right. We are on chapter 15. Oh, goodness. I got choked. Sorry. As you get old, that swallowing your own spit gets harder and harder. I don't know what happens. It's kind of like tripping on air, like what is the malfunction here? Okay, chapter 15. Sorry, guys. The three of them rode out of Compton with their saddlebags fully loaded and a few small cloth sacks hanging from their saddle horns. Jess, can't hear me. Jess had a small ham tied to the saddle for Shadow, who was running alongside Sharps. They rode along the same trail for the next 3 days. On the third day, they camped in a gathering of large trees deep enough inside to stay out of sight. Jess was putting his cans with strings around their perimeter, and Denoyer was cleaning up from supper and finishing the coffee. He had a peppermint stick in his mouth, and he was moving it back and forth with his tongue. Jess walked over, poured some coffee in his cup, and sat down on a dead stump. So you think we'll hit the spot where Ulrich and Persault are hiding tomorrow? He asked Doggy, who looked up from his coffee cup. If we're thinking right, we should hit the heavy forest by noon tomorrow, then stay a good 3 or 4 miles deep inside, so it won't be easy to locate him. We'll have to go most of the way on foot. Jess glanced over at Shadow, who was gnawing on the last of the ham bone. Shadow might be able to help us find where they're hiding, he said. The wolf stopped chewing and raised his head to look at Jess, as if he knew what he wanted. Augie shook his head. I think he understands you. If we've read this, let me know, because it seems like maybe we've read this. I don't know how, said Jess. It's a strange thing, like he knows what I'm thinking before I do. Well, he's been a big help so far, so if he can locate those 2 killers, I say we let him do it, declared Denoyer as he sat down by the fire with his empty cup. He filled it with coffee and took a sip. We got to be careful with those 2, because they're cagey and meaner than a skinned rattler, he cautioned. Let's make sure to check all our weapons before we turn in. Tomorrow, you 2 listen to what I tell you and let me take the lead. That's why we asked you to come along, admitted Augie. We ain't exactly good with the planning parts. They cleaned and checked all their weapons, doused the fire, and turned in for the evening. In the morning, they headed out of camp with Jess in the lead again. They rode along the trail until the heavy forest came into view after traveling over and around a few small hills. Jess halted the horses, and Augie and Denoyer rode up next to him. "That's it," said Augie as he pointed to the two boulders at the edge of the tree line. "How do you know?" "Their old pal said they made a clearing between two boulders to drive their wagon in far enough not to be seen," said Augie. Jess pulled out his spyglass and peered through it, scanning the tree line. "You're right," he muttered. "I see a clearing between them." He put the spyglass away and looked at Augie. "All right. From this point forward, you two do exactly as I say, and don't do anything stupid. We need to move quietly and slowly in case they've set some traps." "Okay," they said in unison. Jess started the horses at a slow gallop so as not to make a lot of noise. As they got closer, they slowed the horses to a walk. Before they reached the two boulders, Shadow ran ahead and disappeared in the weedy overgrowth. They rode to the edge of the forest and climbed out of the saddle. Jess slid out his Winchester, levered a shell in it, and released the hammer. He slid one buffalo rifle out and loaded it. Each took a canteen, and Augie put several cans of beans, some jerky, and hardtack into a sack. He tied it tightly and slung it over his shoulder. Augie and Denoyer slid their rifles out and made sure they had extra shells in their pockets. They walked through the opening and slowly made their way for the first half mile. When they reached the remains of the wagon, the clearing stopped and the going was much slower, weaving around trees and saplings. Jess was in the lead. After a few long, slow hours, he saw Shadow sitting on his haunches waiting for them. When they got closer, he stood up and put his nose to the ground. "What is it, boy?" whispered Jess. He whimpered lowly and clawed at the brush with his paw to uncover a wooden thatch made of thin branches covered with leaves and brush. Jess put his hand up to stop Denoyer and Augie. He bent down and used the barrel of the rifle to lift the thatch to reveal a dugout that was 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. He moved the thatch off the opening. The pit was 5 feet deep, and there were dozens of sharpened branches sticking up out of the bottom. He waved for Denoyer and Augie to come closer to see it. "I'll be danged," whispered Denoyer. "We'd have fell into that if it wasn't for Shadow finding it," said Augie. "We need to move real slow now, because this area might be full of traps like this," said Jess as he rubbed Shadow's head. They continued on, and Shadow found a few more of the deep covered pits. Jess kept folding live branches over to mark the trail so they could find their way back safely. A little farther in, Jess spotted a thin line of catgut running between several saplings. He motioned to Augie and Denoyer to watch for it. They ducked below it and continued on in a painstaking manner, checking the weight on each of their feet before taking another step. Shadow stayed a few feet ahead of them with his nose to the ground most of the time. Then he lifted his head and everyone froze. Shadow turned his neck around to look at Jess before walking ahead on his own. Jess turned to Denoyer and Augie. "I think he wants us to wait while he checks things out up ahead," he whispered. They nodded, took out some jerky and began chewing on it. Augie opened 2 cans of beans and they shared them. A half hour later, Shadow came walking back from a different angle and looked up at Jess before swinging his neck around in the direction he had returned from. "All right, lead the way, boy," Jess told him in a whisper. Shadow turned and walked through the trees, weaving around what was most likely more pits they could fall into. Goodness. After another half hour, Shadow stopped and looked beyond their position. Jess pulled his spyglass out of the leather pouch of cartridges and extended it. He scanned the area where Shadow was looking, and finally he saw some movement. He focused on it until he could see the outline of a man sitting in a tree on a small wooden platform. He moved the spyglass down and over until he could see the flames of a flickering fire and another man sitting next to it with his back to him. He folded the spyglass and put it away before turning to Denoyer and Augie, who moved closer. One of them is up in a tree in a lookout, and the other is sitting by a fire in a clearing about 50 feet away from the other one. "What do you want us to do?" whispered Augie. "We can't just shoot before we try to make sure it's them," he said. "It's possible it could be hunters or just some men living in the woods. I don't want to kill an innocent man, so I'm going to go to the right and set myself up for a shot with my buffalo rifle. I'll do all the talking so they think it might be just one man." Steve. I wish you guys could see Steve. He's curled up behind the computer. He's the show mascot for sure. "What do we do?" asked Augie. "You two move extremely slowly and carefully in that direction, but keep touching the ground with the barrel of your rifle and watch for catgut running through the trees. These two have gone to a lot of trouble to make sure no one catches them by surprise." "When should we stop?" asked Denoyer. "When you can see the man at the fire in the clearing. By then I should be in position, but keep quiet so they don't know you're there until you start firing." Augie and Denoyer nodded and started moving like turtles, one cautious step at a time. Shadow led Jess, going off in a slightly different direction. When he reached a spot that gave him a clean shot at the man in the tree, he stopped and put the pouch of cartridge on the ground by a huge dead tree trunk. He got down on his knees and lifted the sights before peering through his spyglass again. Shadow disappeared into the bushes, heading toward the man by the fire. Jess propped the rifle on the trunk and cupped his hands together. "Hello in the camp." Ulrich, who was sitting lazily in the tree, quickly snapped his head in the direction the yelling had come from, but he couldn't see anyone. He looked down at Persaud, who was standing next to the lean-to now, with his rifle in his hands. Neither of them answered. They simply waited. Jess had a clean shot on the man in the tree, but he couldn't identify him because of the bushy, unkempt beard and full head of hair. He peered through the spyglass, but still couldn't be sure if it was Persaud or Ulrich. He put it down again and cupped his hands together at his mouth. "I'm looking for Dave Ulrich and James Persaud," he hollered. "If you're not them, identify yourself and I'll be on my way." "Who wants to know?" yelled Ulrich. "I'm a bounty hunter, and I have wanted posters on both men. I'm the only one here. I'm just hunting for meat." "You did an awful lot of work just to be out here hunting. What's the reasoning for digging pits and driving stakes into the bottom of them?" "How did you get around all them anyway?" asked Ulrich. "Shadow." "Huh?" Ulrich muttered to himself as he waved to Persaud and pointed to the area that Jess was in. "I don't know any Ulrich or Persaud, so find your way back out of here before I start shooting," he warned as he levered around into his rifle. Augie and Denoyer were standing next to trees, listening to the hollering back and forth. Denoyer felt something on his boot, and when he looked down, he saw a snake slithering across his foot. It started curling around his ankle, and he tried to shake it off. When he finally kicked his leg hard enough to dislodge it, he accidentally triggered his rifle. Dang it. The slug slammed harmlessly into a nearby tree. "Damn it," muttered Jess, as he saw the man in the tree fire his rifle in the direction the shot had come from. What is going on out there? Hey, quit. Augie glared at Denoyer as a slug slammed into a tree 5 feet from where he stood. The snake slithered away into the thick grass. "Why the heck did you fire that shot?" demanded Augie. "I had a snake trying to make love to my leg." "Was it a rattler?" "No, just a snake." Another rifle fired, and the slug hit a tree closer to Augie. Jess was taking aim at the man in the tree with his buffalo rifle. He squeezed back on the trigger until the rifle bucked and boomed, sending smoke, flames, and lead out the end of the barrel. The 375 grain-modified slug sizzled through the air and found Ulrich's left arm just below his shoulder. He twisted to his right and almost fell off the small platform. Jess chambered another round into the rifle and swung it over at the lean-to in the clearing, but he couldn't see the other man now. He moved the rifle back toward the man in the tree, but he was climbing down, and only his side stuck out from behind it. He heard rifle shots coming from Augie and Denoyer and saw the slugs tearing away at the bark of the tree, but they kept missing the man as he made his way down. Jess took aim at the man's side that was barely showing. He fired, and the slug ripped at the man's hip, tearing a chunk of flesh from it. He howled and fell to the ground, rolled over, and started running for the lean-to. Jess quickly chambered another shell in and took aim, leading the man in his sights by a few inches. He fired, and the rifle bucked against his shoulder. He looked up and saw the man stumble, tilt forward as he took little jerky steps, and hit the ground, rolling a few times before stopping on his back. He clawed for his rifle, but it was out of reach, so he started pulling himself along the ground, trying to reach the lean-to for cover. Denoyer was walking toward the camp and Jess saw it. "Get back behind a tree," he yelled. "I don't have eyes on the other man now." Just as Denoyer darted behind a tree, a rifle shot rang out and the slug ripped a hole in his left arm above his elbow. "I'm hit," he wailed as they heard screaming from where the shot had come from. "Shadow," muttered Jess as he grabbed his other rifle, stood up, and strode quickly toward the man crawling toward the lean-to. He reached Ulrich just before he was able to reach the rifle that was leaning against one of the trees of the lean-to. Jess levered around into his Winchester. "You ain't gonna make it," he cautioned Ulrich, who slowly rolled over onto his back. Jess could scarcely tell who it was underneath all the hair, but he knew it was Ulrich. "Dave Ulrich, you're wanted dead or alive and worth $10,000, said Jess as he heard more barking, growling, and wailing coming from some nearby bushes. Ulrich leaned his head to the side and spat on the ground. "Kiss my ass, mister," he said defiantly. "I reckon not, since I don't think you've bathed lately by the smell of it," Jess said as he wiggled his nose. "Where's my partner?" Jess heard more barking and growling. "I'm pretty sure he's getting chewed on by Shadow." "Who the hell is Shadow?" "Big timber wolf who helps me from time to time." Ulrich moaned and grimaced from the pain. "You might as well kill me, mister, 'cause I ain't going in alive to have my neck stretched," he said as he glared up at him. "You and your partner have murdered more people than most, so I say why waste the rope?" he said as he aimed the rifle at his heart and fired. Ulrich's body flinched and his legs kicked a few times before he became stone still. Jess levered another round in his rifle and headed for the bushes where Shadow was still barking and growling. Augie and Denoyer saw him moving and they started walking toward him. He pushed through the bushes to see Persault on his back and thrashing his arms around. Shadow stood to the side of him and laughed at him when he moved, taking another pound of flesh when he did. "I got him, Shadow," he said, as he pointed the rifle at Persault, who was feeling his arm with his bloody hand. Shadow moved to Persault's feet and stood there, growling gutturally. Augie and Denoyer walked up, pointing rifles at him. "Is Ulrich dead?" asked Persault. "Yep," said Jess. "Who are you men?" he asked as he tried to move his feet. Shadow clamped his jaw on one of his boots. "Get that crazy animal off me," he railed as he pulled his bloody arm inward toward his chest. "Come here, Shadow," said Jess as he tapped his leg. He walked over to him and sat down with his tongue hanging out as he panted. "Shadow? You call that beast Shadow?" "Yes, he's my good friend," he said. "You must be bounty hunters." "Yep, I'm Jess Williams, and this is Augie and Denoyer, he said as he nodded at each one. And you've already met Shadow. Last I heard, we was worth 5,000 each. So what are we worth now? 10,000 each, said Augie. Yep, we gonna be rich, added Denoyer. You can all go to hell, including that mangy cur, spat Persault, as his face scrunched up in anger and resentment. We will, when our time comes, but you're getting a head start, said Jess, as he lifted the rifle and pointed it at his forehead. Persault's eyes went wide with fear as he saw death coming for him. Jess fired, and the slug punched a hole in his forehead just above his right eye. His legs pulsated for a few seconds, and then he let out his death rattle as his head gently floated to the side. Augie and Denoyer stood there looking at the dead body, as if they still didn't believe they had caught their elusive prey. Denoyer looked up from the body at Jess with a questioning expression on his face. How do you do that? He asked. Do what? Just plug a man like that. Well, first I made sure my rifle had a shell in the chamber. Then I aimed it at his forehead and... No, I mean in your head, said Denoyer. I'll go out of my way not to kill an innocent man. But with these two, with all the innocent people they've tortured and killed, I have no compunction about putting bullets in their brains, he said, as plainly as he could. Denoyer looked back down at the body and grunted. I reckon you got a point, he said as he touched his arm. How bad you hit? Asked Jess. Not bad, he said as he grimaced from the pain. And when we get paid, I can hire me a doctor and a few pretty gals to hold on to while I get stitched up. Do they have law in that town east of here? Asked Jess. Yeah, Bassett's 5 miles east and has a town marshal by the name of Ken Lockhart, answered Augie. Let's look around and see if they have any horses tethered nearby to haul the bodies with, said Jess. My pack horse can handle 2 men for a short distance, but I'd rather not if I don't have to. Shadow barked and ran off through the bushes. Jess followed him and led him to a horse. Jess followed him and he led him to a horse tied to a tree by some heavy grass. Jess untied the horse, and Shadow ran off. On the way back to camp, he caught a whiff of stench and heard the familiar flapping of wings. He found his nose to it and found a deep hole where Shadow stood sniffing the air. The disturbed vultures flapped their wings and soared up through the trees. He looked down in the hole and saw dozens of bones and a few rotting corpses. He looked at the freshest one. It was from a man who looked like he'd been in the hole for a week or so. He shook his head and turned to the camp. Hey, Denoyer, Augie, he called out. A few minutes later, the two came pushing through the bushes and trees, pinching their noses with their fingers. That smells something awful, blurted Augie, as he looked down into the hole at the human remains mixed in with the remains of deer. I count at least 10 human heads, not counting the one the buzzards were working on, said Jess, as he put his handkerchief over his nose. How come that fresh one's missing a leg from the knee down? Muttered Denoyer. Jess looked closer at the older bones and saw the hatchet marks on them. Looks like they weren't just eating venison, he said, as he shook his head. Denoyer dry heaved and bowled over before puking his stomach contents out onto the ground. He spat several times and turned away from the macabre scene. That's horrible that someone would eat a human, he said, as he heaved a few more times. Seeing that is what makes it easier to put a bullet into someone like Ulrich and Persault, said Jess, as he turned and walked the horse back toward the camp, with Augie and Denoyer following him. It's getting late, so let's stay here tonight and leave in the morning after we get our horses, suggested Jess. And drag these two away from the camp before they're going to start stinking by daylight. They hauled the 2 corpses far enough into the woods to keep the smell from bothering them. Shadow took off again on his own. Augie patched up Denoyer's arm while Jess made a fire and started cooking. They were eating when Shadow returned with a fat rabbit in his jaws. Denoyer chuckled and nodded at Shadow. Looks like he knew we was staying and went and got his supper, he said. I reckon so, said Jess, as he took another spoonful of the beans and chewed them. Gypsy says, I picked the wrong time to eat eggs over easy. You're welcome. That was pretty graphic, wasn't it? Chapter 17. The town marshal, Ken Lockhart, stood outside the jail watching the three men ride into Bassett with two corpses draped across a horse and what looked like a huge timber wolf walking alongside a pack horse. He focused his eyes on the lead man, and they widened as he realized who it was. What is Jess Williams doing all the way out this way? He muttered to himself as he waited by the jail. When they reached him, Jess slid from the saddle and walked up the steps. What brings you all the way out to Colorado? Bassett asked. Jess removed the two wanted posters on Ulrich and Persault and handed them to him. He looked at them, and his face went from casual to confusion, and then to a look of disbelief as he slowly raised his eyes to the two corpses. It ain't possible, he stammered. Them boys is down in South America. Actually, they're right here on the horse, said Jess as he pointed to them. I gotta see it to believe it, he said as he walked down the steps and over to the bodies. As he walked by the other two men who were still on their horses, he didn't look up when he spoke. Augie, Denoyer, how'd you get partnered up with Jess Williams? He asked, as if he didn't really want an answer. We met him in Fannin, where we was turning in the body of Bernard Blackstone after we killed him, bragged Denoyer. Jess shot him a scornful look as he cocked his head. Denoyer's demeanor changed as Ken Lockhart stopped and turned to look up at him. You two killed Blackstone? He asked with a doubtful look splashing across his face. Denoyer hung his head. Well, actually, we was helping Jess transport the body to the town of Fannin, he admitted awkwardly. Lockhart glanced at Jess, who just shrugged his shoulders indifferently. Lockhart grunted loudly, went to the bodies, and lifted each head up by the thick hair. He said softly. Can't tell with all this hair covering their faces. I'll get the barber from the tonsorial parlor to come and shave them so I can be sure. Where's the best place for a hot meal, Marshal? Jess asked. Oh, that'd be Loretta's Eatery down the street, he said, pointing to a building painted a bright yellow color. We'll be over there getting a good meal, said Jess, as he walked down the steps and grabbed the reins to Gray. Lockhart cut the horse with the two bodies loose and started hauling them to the tonsorial parlor. Jess, Denoyer, Augie, and Shadow headed for Loretta's. When they reached it, Augie and Denoyer slipped from the saddle, and Shadow walked up the steps and curled up outside the screen door. Jess leaned over and scratched his ears. I'll send something good out for you, boy, he said, as Shadow licked his hand. They walked in and found a table in a corner with a view of the entire place. It was busy, with two waitresses running around serving and picking up empty dishes. Jess saw a plate of food going by him. It had a slab of meatloaf with a pile of mashed potatoes, and it was smothered in deep, dark gravy. I know what I'm getting, he said as he removed his hat and set it on the chair next to him. The waitress scooted over to their table. She was a young woman with long blonde hair that was braided in the back. She had deep blue eyes that caught Denoyer's attention right off. He went starry-eyed, and he kept looking up at her. What can I get for you, gentlemen? She asked, as she noticed Denoyer's constant gaze. I'll take the meatloaf special, said Jess, and coffee. Me too, added Augie. The waitress turned her attention to Denoyer, who sat there, gazing at her with his mouth agape. And you, sir? She asked. Nothing came out of his mouth as he sat there mesmerized by her beauty. Sir? She reiterated as she lowered her pad of paper. He'll take the meatloaf special, too, intervened Jess. She made a mark on her pad and turned to leave, but she turned back to Denoyer again. "Would you like coffee?" she asked him. He simply nodded his head slowly. She forced a smile at him before scooting to the kitchen. Augie elbowed him, bringing him back to the present. "What the hell was that?" he asked. What do you mean?" "What just happened?" he said. "You're sitting there all goofy-eyed, not able to talk." "She's the most beautiful woman I ever laid eyes on," he said in a soft tone of voice. "So what?" declared Augie. "Have you looked in a mirror lately? You're dirty, smelly, and you need a shave and a haircut. She ain't having anything to do with the likes of you." "What about when she finds out I'm rich?" he argued. "You don't look rich," blurted Augie, "and we ain't even got paid yet." "But we're going to get paid, ain't we?" he asked as he looked at Jess, who was leaning back in his chair with his left hand draped across the top of the chair next to him. "Yeah, we'll get paid," said Jess. "But Augie does have a point. You look like you've been living in a cave." "I can clean up right nicely," he countered as the waitress came out, carrying 3 plates of food on one arm and a pot of coffee in her hand. She had 3 cups in her other hand, and she balanced it all as she put the coffee and the cups on the table before setting the plates of food in front of them. She poured the coffee as she kept glancing at Denoyer, who was still staring at her with enchantment sparkling in his eyes. "Will there be anything else?" she asked as she broke her gaze at Denoyer. "Do they have ham in the back?" asked Jess. You want a whole ham?" she asked. "Actually, one with some meat left on the bone will do." "I could bring you a ham steak if you'd like." "No, it's for my friend outside." She glanced over at the screen door. "Why doesn't your friend come inside to eat?" "Because he's a wolf, and some people are frightened of him." "Is he tame?" "Yes, his name is Shadow." "I'll take a ham bone with a lot of meat out to him myself, along with a bowl of water," she said, as she poured more coffee into their cups. Denoyer gazed up at her. Thank you," mumbled Denoyer. She looked at his blood-stained shirt sleeve. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Oh, that," he stammered goofily. I got shot while we was in a gunfight with 2 of the most dangerous men alive, but we killed 'em both." Jess shot him another shameful look. "Oh, my goodness," she said as her blue eyes widened. "Are you going to be okay?" Denoyer looked at his arm and smiled. "It don't hurt much," he bragged. "I'll go and see the doctor later." "That would be my father, Dr. Darwin Smullen," she said proudly. "I usually help him with such things when I'm not working here. Would you like me to take you to him later?" "You would do that?" asked Denoyer. "For someone so brave, of course," she said, smiling. Denoyer's face flushed. "I'll meet you back here when?" 4 o'clock sharp? My name is Sharon Smullen." "I'll be here with bells on," he said as his eyes sparkled with affection. She went back into the kitchen and came out with a ham bone with a chunk of meat on one end of it, in one hand, and a large bowl of water in the other. She took it out to the front porch. Shadow jumped up and sniffed the ham. She gave him the bone, and he gently took it from her. He got down on all fours and started chewing at the meat. She put the bowl of water down by him, and he licked her hand. "You're welcome, Shadow," she said as she stroked his head. Jess watched her through the window. She was rubbing the wolf's head. "You might have some competition out there," he chuckled as he looked at Denoyer. "Huh? Who?" Jess didn't respond because his eyes were now locked on the man riding into town. He sat tall in the saddle and was dressed nicely in brown denim pants, a cream-colored shirt, and a brown Stetson hat. The revolver that rested on his left leg was tied down tight and low. The man stopped and turned to watch the woman petting the wolf. He smiled, but his eyes slowly rose as if he could sense something was out of the ordinary. When his eyes locked on Jess's, his smile faded as he whispered to himself, "Jess Williams," he said softly. Jess straightened up. Harvey Shane," he whispered to himself as he donned his hat and slowly stood up, removing his hammer strap as he did. Chapter 18. Harvey Shane slipped effortlessly from the saddle, deftly removed his hammer strap as he did. He waited for Jess to come out of the eatery. Sharon stood there, and Shadow got up on all fours and began growling. "Afternoon, ma'am," said Shane as he removed his hat and nodded at her. She smiled nervously at him. He put his hat back on as his eyes flashed back to Jess. "I didn't know you came this far out from Texas," he said. "I usually don't," admitted Jess. "But it's funny that I would see you here. I left Texas because of you." "You sure it wasn't the $5,000 they posted on your head, dead or alive?" "No, it was because of you. I wasn't worried about the other bounty hunters, and I didn't want to have to kill any law dogs, so I figured the best thing to do was to leave Texas." "I reckon I can respect that, especially about not wanting to kill any lawmen," said Jess. "I didn't want to kill that deputy in Lawrence, but he wouldn't listen to reason, and he pulled on me without warning," he said with meaning. "I even wounded him with my first shot, but he insisted on a meeting with the devil." "I heard different stories about what happened," admitted Jess. "Some say it was you who robbed that train and killed that conductor. Others say it wasn't." "I don't like trains. Never even been on one." "Maybe. But you have killed 6 men that I know about." "All gunslingers and gamblers," debated Shane. "And every one of them forced my hand. I guess it was a curse to learn how to shuck a gun out quicker than most. You should know about that, personal like." "I reckon I do," Jess said plainly. Shane smiled at him. "I see you haven't moved your right hand closer to that cannon on your right leg." "No, I haven't, because I noticed that you've been keeping your right hand away from yours." "Trying to not give you a reason to find out who's faster," he admitted. "And yet there's still that 5,000 on your head." "Yep, there is that." The two stood there, face to face, for the longest time, neither of them making any movement toward his pistol. Augie and Denoyer stood inside the screen door, watching and listening. Shadow stopped growling and sat down on his rear haunches. Sharon stood there looking back and forth between the two. Shane finally broke the silence. "A man gets mighty thirsty out on the dusty trail, so I'm going to go to that saloon down the street and have me a drink or two," he said as he removed his pocket watch and checked the time. "I'll be there for exactly 1 hour, if you get my meaning." "I do, and I appreciate your honesty," said Jess. Shane walked his horse along the street, heading for the saloon. Jess watched him with interest. Augie and Denoyer strolled out and stood on the porch by Sharon. Shadow got down on all fours again and began eating the ham. "What was that all about?" asked Augie. $5,000. "What do you mean?" asked Denoyer. "He's worth 5,000, dead or alive." Denoyer glanced at Augie. "Then let's go and collect on it," said Augie. Jess watched Shane walk into the saloon, glancing over at him before he disappeared through the bat wings. Jess turned back to Augie and Denoyer. "That's Harvey Shane," he said with a knowing look on his face. The two bounty hunters slowly turned their heads toward the saloon. "That was Harvey Shane?" mumbled Denoyer. "He don't look like no cold-blooded killer to me." "That's because he isn't," explained Jess. "He's just extremely fast at sliding a gun out. Too many men have tried his hand and lost." "Then why does he have such a high price on his head?" inquired Augie. "He killed a deputy town marshal who claimed he robbed a train and killed the conductor." "Did he?" asked Augie. Jess turned his head back to the saloon for a long moment. "I don't believe so. At least not the train robbery," he said as he saw Marshal Lockhart headed for the saloon with a sawed-off in one hand and what looked like a wanted poster in his other. That ain't good, muttered Jess as he headed for the saloon with Shadow following him, still holding the ham bone in his jaws. Jess heard loud voices coming from the inside before he pushed through the doors to see Marshall Lockhart waving the shotgun nervously at Shane, who stood calmly at the bar sipping whiskey. Shadow released the ham bone from his jaws. When it hit the floor, it made a loud thud that startled the marshal, who snapped his head around to see what it was. Shadow sat down, and the marshal turned his head back around to see Shane still standing there calmly, sipping his whiskey. Jess walked up next to Lockhart. "Good to see you," said Lockhart, his face white with fear as his lower lip quivered slightly. "That's Harvey Shane, standing right there, and I got him dead to rights." "Only if he wants you to," cautioned Jess. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I got this greener pointed straight at him, and his gun is still in the holster." Jess looked over at Shane, who stood there holding a glass in his left hand, while his right hand hovered around the butt of his pistol. Shane snapped a smile at him before taking another sip of whiskey. "Maybe, but you haven't pulled those hammers back yet, and he can slick out that pistol of his and put a bullet in you before you can move your thumb. But I don't think he wants to do that." "Why do you think that?" "Because you're still alive." "But he's wanted for robbery and murder involving a train, a conductor, and a deputy marshal," said Lockhart. "I know that's what the wanted poster says, but I'm not sure he's guilty of it," said Jess as he looked at the paper on the table and next to where they stood. Both Jess and Shane heard and saw the noise and flash of movement off to the right side of the saloon. A short man jumped up from his chair with his pistol in hand, thumbing the hammer back as he turned directly at Jess. Shane and Jess slicked their pistols out and fired one shot each. Both slugs slammed in the middle of the man's chest, knocking him backward against the wall. He slowly slid down, leaving a bloody smear on it as he did. Jess and Shane locked eyes as they pointed their pistols at one another. They stood there for a few tense moments, and then Shane suddenly smiled as he slowly holstered his pistol and moved his right hand away from it. Lockhart grunted and looked at the dead man. "Who the hell was he gunning for, you or me?" he asked. Jess broke his gaze on Shane and holstered his pistol as he turned to the marshal. "I don't know the man, and I don't know which one of us he was attempting to shoot, but if I had to take a guess, it was me." "You think so?" said Lockhart. "His eyes were focused on me, and I have a lot of brothers, friends, and fathers of men I've killed who would like to see me eat a bullet." "Well, what about him?" asked Lockhart as he nodded at Shane, who was watching them as he stood there. Jess removed his badge from his shirt pocket and flashed it at him before dropping it back in his pocket. "What the? Is that what I think it was?" "Yeah, and don't spread it around," he said as he turned his attention back to Shane. "Marshall, how about you let me take care of Shane?" "Oh, all right," he said as he picked up the wanted poster and scrunched it up in his hand. He motioned for two men to haul out the dead body. Jess slowly walked up next to Shane at the bar and ordered a whiskey. "How'd you get that marshal to back off?" Shane asked. "I suppose it was just courtesy." "Was that a badge you showed him?" "Maybe." "And what about you?" "What about me?" "You going to try to take me in yourself?" "Haven't quite decided on it. Maybe." "You know you have to kill me in order to do that?" asked Shane. "No, I don't know that for certain." "Why's that?" "Because you had the perfect opportunity a few minutes ago when that man, whoever he is, tried to kill me," Shane chuckled. "What do you find amusing?" "You." "Me?" "Yeah, you were ready to plug me as soon as the slug left the end of the barrel of that thing you carry on your right leg." "Was I?" "I'm pretty sure you were." "Well, we'll never know, will we?" "No, I suppose not, but I don't think my slug hit that man first." "But I do think my slug hit that man first." "You do?" "I'm thinking so," he said as he sipped his whiskey. "So explain to me what happened on that train that day," said Jess. He took a sip of whiskey as Denoyer and Augie walked in and sat down at a table where Shadow was sitting, watching Jess. Denoyer reached down and scratched his ears, but Shadow didn't take his eyes off Jess. "I can't tell you what happened, because I wasn't there that day," he said, as if he'd stated it a dozen times before and hated repeating it. "It really wasn't you." "Nope. But no one will believe me." "I think I might," he said as he took another sip of his whiskey and turned to smile at Shadow, who immediately picked up the ham bone and walked under the swinging doors. Shane watched with interest. "So what's with the wolf?" "That's Shadow. He's a friend of mine." "Is that why he kept staring at us?" "Yeah. If you'd tried anything, he would have crossed the room in a heartbeat and attacked you." "I could have shot him before he got to me." "And I'd shoot you before you did that." "You're assuming you're faster than me." "What makes you think I'm assuming anything?" Shane chuckled again as he looked around the room and saw Denoyer and Augie. He leaned his left elbow on the edge of the bar and turned his head to Jess. "So, now what?" "I'm not exactly sure, but I'd like to ask you not to leave town until we speak again tomorrow." "Are you ordering me to stay?" "No, I'm asking," Jess said as he looked directly at him. "I'll get me a room at the hotel," he said, grinning. "I got to go and find the telegraph office," Jess said, as he put a $5 gold piece on the bar and headed for the Batwings. He stopped at the table Denoyer and Augie were sitting at. "You two leave Shane to me. Understand?" "No problem," said Augie. "Yeah, we ain't messing with the likes of Harvey Shane for no amount of money," agreed Denoyer. "I want to be able to spend the money I got coming to me." "Smart thinking," Jess said, as he pushed through the doors. He saw Shadow down on all fours gnawing on the bone. "Thanks, Shadow," he said, before stepping off the boardwalk. Chapter 19. Frank Reedy sat at a table by himself in the elegant bar of the Stratton Hotel. Henry Stratton stood behind the bar taking inventory of his liquor supply and jotting notes on a piece of paper. A young boy came walking into the bar, and Henry put his hand up in the air as he frowned at him. "Joshua, you shouldn't be in here without your father," he said politely but firmly. "I'm just here to deliver a telegraph message to the marshal," he said, as he waved the pink slip around in his hand. Reedy looked up from the sandwich he was eating and smiled. "Bring it here, Joshua," he said as he fished around in his pocket for 2 bits. Joshua handed Reedy the paper, and he dropped the quarter into his outstretched palm. The boy ran out of the place, and Reedy unfolded the paper and read the message from Jess. He grunted a few times as he read it. He set it back down and picked up his sandwich again. Henry stopped taking notes and ambled over to Reedy, who looked deep in thought. "Good news or bad news, Marshal?" "A little bit of both, I think," he said as he looked at the slip of paper again. "Who's it from?" "Our friend Jess Williams." "What has he got himself involved in now?" "He's inquiring about Harvey Shane, one of the fastest men alive with a gun," he said. "Shane allegedly killed a conductor on a train he was supposedly robbing, and then he killed a deputy town marshal a few weeks later. He's wanted dead or alive for $5,000, and Jess is with him now in a town called Bassett over in Colorado." "Has he killed this Shane fellow yet?" "No, and that's the interesting part," said Reedy. "Usually he wouldn't hesitate, but he says he's not sure that Shane is guilty of the robbery or the murder of the conductor." "But you said he killed a deputy town marshal. Isn't that enough reason for Jess to kill this Shane fella?" "Ordinarily, but our friend seems to feel that something is amiss in all of it, and that's the deputy town marshal, and that the deputy town marshal was as hot-headed as they come. The marshal there said he tried to stop his deputy from drawing on Shane, but he wouldn't listen. Probably thought he'd get himself all famous by gunning down a man like Shane, but all he got was a dirt blanket for his efforts. The marshal had enough sense to let Shane go and try to track him down later with a posse, but they never found him. He's in Colorado now, but I'm not sure why our friend was all the way out there." "Well, I have to get back to my inventory," said Henry, as he turned to stroll back back behind the long, dark mahogany bar. Reedy sat there eating his sandwich and glanced at the slip of paper on the table. John Bodine walked out of the restaurant on the other side of the lobby. He noticed Reedy sitting in the bar, and he walked in and nodded at Henry. "Your boss has some interesting information," whispered Henry as he thumbed over to him. "He ain't my boss anymore," he countered as he tapped his badge. "Of course he is," smiled Henry as he went back to his list. Bodine walked over and sat down across from Reedy. "Why don't you take your lunch in the restaurant with me?" he asked. Reedy picked up the slip of paper and handed it to him. "It's too noisy in there," he said. "I like to eat in here where it's quiet and peaceful and someone's not going to steal the other half of my sandwich." "That's not funny," he mumbled. "So who's this from?" "Just read it." Bodine read the message and put it down. "Harvey Shane? He's with Harvey Shane and hasn't killed him yet." "That's what I was wondering," said Henry from behind the bar without looking at them. "He wants us to inquire some more about that train robbery when Shane supposedly killed that conductor." "What difference would it make anyway? Everyone knows it was Shane who killed that deputy marshal in Lawrence." "Yes, but if he was innocent of the robbery and murder of the conductor on that train, I can see why he'd defend himself against a hot-headed deputy hell-bent on killing him just for reputation." "Hmm. So you want me to go and start wiring Washington to find out some more information about the matter? Maybe check with the Pinkerton agency, too?" "No, I'll take care of it, since I figure it's time for you to go back in the restaurant and have that second piece of pie." "Don't start on me, Frank." "Go on, you knucklehead," he chuckled as he folded the message and stuffed it in his front shirt pocket. Bodine stood up and headed through the lobby and into the restaurant again. Joy Stratton took him by the arm and led him to a table. Reedy finished his meal and headed out toward the telegraph office. The town of Bassett slowly started coming alive at dawn. Jess woke as the first slivers of daylight peeked into his room and through the heavy drapes. He splashed water on his face and wiped it with a towel from the long bureau. He put his guns on and opened the door slowly, his right hand on the butt of his pistol. As he closed his door, another one down the hall opened. Harvey Shane came out of his room, his hand on the butt of his pistol also. They locked eyes again, and both of them smiled. "I see we have something in common," said Jess. "Yeah, a man can't be too careful when he lives by the gun." "I agree." "You surprised to see me this morning?" "No, not really. I didn't take you for a man who would run from a problem." "Nah, just not in my nature to do that." "I smell coffee." "And I smell bacon," said Shane as he waved to the stairway. Jess grinned and waved to the stairway next. "After you," he said knowingly. "I'm almost offended," chuckled Shane as he strolled past Jess and headed down the steps. They walked into the small cafe in the hotel to find Augie and Denoyer already sitting at a table eating flapjacks and bacon. Both of them were clean-shaven and had haircuts. What surprised Jess the most was that Denoyer was wearing a light gray pinstriped suit, a white shirt, and a black string tie adorned with a gold medallion that held it tightly around his neck. They walked to the table next to them and sat down. "What the heck happened to you?" Jess asked Denoyer. "Well, I figured if I was going to court Miss Sharon, I needed to clean up, so I bought me this shop-made suit to impress her," he explained. "Her father stitched me up yesterday after I told him how we killed two brutal murderers. He seemed impressed." Jess gave him a funny look. "I don't suppose my name came up anywhere in the conversation?" he asked. Augie lowered his head. "I reckon he just forgot," said Augie. Hang on a second, my mic is walking down. Gotta stick out your tongue, it helps. There we go. There. Augie lowered his head. "I reckon he just forgot," said Augie. "Sorry," said Denoyer, as if he meant it. "All right, you can stick to that story if it'll get you hitched and out of my hair," said Jess. "Are we getting paid today?" asked Augie. "We all need to meet up at the marshal's office this morning after we eat," replied Jess. "He has identified the bodies we brought in, and he's ready to pay the bounty on their heads." "Are we doing anything about him?" asked Augie nervously. "I mean, he's worth $5,000, and he's right here, and the jail is across the street." Shane smiled at Augie, displaying his set of perfect white teeth. "And what would you like me to do? And what would you like to do about me?" Oh, I see. Shane smiled at Augie, displaying his set of perfect white teeth. "And what would you like to do about me?" Denoyer took his fork and stuck Augie in his hand with it. "We ain't doing nothing about him," he said. "We're each getting paid a lot of money, and I'm fine with that." All right. But you don't have to be sticking me with that fork," Augie groused as he looked at his hand to see if he was bleeding. Chapter 20. Jess, Shane, Augie, and Denoyer all went to the jail to meet with Marshal Lockhart. When they ambled in one by one, they found Lockhart rifling through a pile of wanted posters. There was a long slip of paper on his desk. Lockhart glanced up at Jess as he pushed the paper across to him. He picked it up and began reading it. The marshal picked out 2 wanted posters from the pile on his desk. "Ah, here they are," he said, as he shoved them across the desk. "According to that message from United States Marshal Frank Reedy, these are the 2 men you should be looking for." Jess picked them up and looked them over. "These are 2 brothers," said Jess as he showed them to Shane. "I got a response back from Frank Reedy, and he said that these 2 wanted men should be of interest to you and me." "Why would I be interested in them?" Shane asked. "I'm not the bounty hunter here." "Doesn't the last name interest you?" Shane looked at the names again, and it slowly came to him. "Wait a minute," he muttered as he rubbed his chin. "I killed a man in a poker game last year, and his last name was the same. It was Lee Adair." That makes sense because Lee was the youngest of 3 brothers. The other 2 brothers who are still alive are the men on those wanted posters, Stuart and Jim Adair. "All right, but I still don't see why it should interest me," debated Shane. "It should, because Stuart and Jim Adair are the 2 men who identified you as the one who killed that conductor during the train robbery," explained Jess as he went over the long message from Reedy again. "The story my friend pieced together is that they helped the real killer of that conductor and framed you because you killed their brother Lee." "Then why didn't the law arrest them when they falsely identified me as the killer?" "Because they weren't wanted at the time," explained Jess as he continued to read the message. After a few more of the passengers came forward, warrants were issued on them as co-conspirators of the robbery. They've been dodging the law ever since. "Okay, so you're saying we should track these 2 men down and what? Arrest them?" "No, but they can probably tell us who really killed that conductor and robbed the train. I assume you do want to clear your name." "And what if they don't want to, and what if they won't talk?" submitted Shane. "After all, I did kill their brother." "Don't worry. They'll talk," said Jess in a most confident way. "Do you need us to go with you?" asked Augie. "No," they both said in unison as they snapped their heads toward him. Denoyer, who acted as if he had no interest in the conversation, stepped forward. "I just want to get paid," he said. "I got me a woman to court." Lockhart glanced up at him keenly. "You'd best be cautious around Miss Sharon," he advised Denoyer. "The last man who tried to court her still can't walk straight to this day. Dr. Smullen is a retired prize fighter from out east, and he can beat you senseless if you do his daughter wrong." Jess chuckled and grinned at Denoyer. "I don't think it would make much difference," he said. Denoyer's face went slack-jawed. "Was that an insult?" he asked. "Nah, just having some fun with you," said Jess. "I wish you luck, Court and Sharon. While it's been interesting working with you 2, I'll be relieved to finally part ways." "I had the bank messenger divide the money into 3 separate envelopes," he said as he opened his top drawer and pulled the envelopes out. "Of course, I took the 200 that Williams told me to take for my trouble." "You gave him a share of our money?" carped Denoyer. "Don't worry, I had him take it out of my share," he said. "Oh, well, I guess that's just fine then," said Denoyer as he stuffed the envelope into his back pocket. Augie extended his hand and shook Jess's. It was a pleasure working with you, Jess, but we's both retiring from bounty hunting, he said. I got my eye on a house in town, and I'm going to stand up for Denoyer if he convinces Dr. Smullen to let him marry his daughter. Good luck to both of you, said Jess as he reached over and shook hands with Denoyer next. Especially to you and your courting of Sharon. Thanks to you, I have enough money to buy her a house and anything she wants in it, he said as he pumped Jess's hand. And her father thinks I'm a brave man bringing in 2 ruthless killers. Don't push that matter too much, advised Jess. He might find out the truth of what really happened, especially the part about you getting shot for being careless. If it weren't for Shadow attacking Persault when he did, you might have taken a bullet to the chest instead of your arm. I reckon that might be true, he admitted. The 2 bounty hunters thanked the marshal and strolled out. Augie headed for the bank to see about buying a house. Denoyer headed straight for Loretta's eatery to see Sharon. Lockhart glanced up at Jess and Shane. So are you 2 heading out to find the Adair brothers? He asked as he glanced back and forth between them. Jess picked up the wanted posters and read them again. I don't suppose I have much choice in the matter if I want to clear my name, but I'm not a tracker or a hunter of men, though, so I could use the help, said Shane as he smiled. Jess folded the wanted posters and stuck them into his front pocket. Well, they're wanted alive for questioning, and they're worth $500 each, so I suppose I can let you ride with me long enough to find them. I'll make you a deal, offered Shane. Yeah? What kind of deal? You help me find them and clear my name, and I'll pay you double the reward money out of my own pocket. I don't do this for money. Then why? I do it for the right and wrong of it. Quite frankly, I don't care why you do it, just that you do. All right, then. We can leave as soon as I supply up at the store. Marshall, do you have any idea where the Adair brothers might be? Their pappy used to have a small farm over in Texas outside the town of Spruce, he recalled. I don't know if that's where they are, but those 2 are just stupid enough to think that no one would come looking for him there. The town marshal is Matt Rowlett. He's a mean one, but fair. Thanks, Marshal, said Jess, as he stuffed the envelope with his share of the bounty money inside the front of his shirt. The 2 walked outside the jail, and Shane stopped abruptly, almost causing Jess to run into him. Jess followed Shane's stare across the street to a man who was leaning up against the side of his horse, smoking a Quirly. He was dressed in a business suit, and the jacket was almost covering the Colt Peacemaker on his right hip. He was staring straight at Shane, with a slight smile curled up at the corner of his lips. Friend of yours? Asked Jess. Don't walk on the keyboard. As he slipped his hammer strap off. Oh, come here, bud. Which caused the man to stop smiling and push his... Where are you going? And push his suit jacket behind the butt of his pistol. That's Rudy Halpern. I'm not certain at this point about being friends, Shane said in an odd tone. The man pushed off the side of the horse and turned straight at them. Harvey Shane, you owe me $5,000, and I'm here to collect it one way or another, he said as he took a few steps toward them. I don't owe you a penny, said Shane in a curt tone. Then I guess one of us will meet with the devil today, cackled Halpern as he thumbed his hammer strap off his pistol and strode to the middle of the street. Chapter 21, and we'll stop after this one. Shane stepped off the boardwalk and into the street. Marshal Lockhart came out with a sawed-off in his hand. He watched the 2 men line up in the street, 20 feet apart. Halpern stood with his feet spread wide, but Shane stood partially sideways, with his left hip slightly forward. What's all this about? Asked Lockhart. Jess didn't take his eyes off the 2 men when he spoke. It seems there's a matter regarding $5,000 and whether Shane owes the man the money or not. Lockhart looked up and down the street, searching for anyone who might be in the line of fire. I don't like gunplay in my town, he called out to Shane and Halpern. You'd best stay out of this, badge toter, warned Halpern, without taking his eyes off Shane. I got this greener in my hands, and it's loaded, Lockhart cautioned. Maybe, But if you try to ear one of those hammers back, I'll plug you before you pull the trigger. Your beef, such as it is, with me, Halprin. Your beef, such as it is with me, Halprin snarled. Halprin, good night. Your beef, such as it is with me, Halprin, snarled Shane. What do you mean, such as it is? You claim I owe you $5,000, which is exactly the amount you lost to me in that poker game over in Wichita. I didn't lose it. You cheated that money out of me. If it was a fair game, you would have known that. And hi, if it was a fair game, and you would have known that had you not been so drunk. So you say you were on your second bottle of neck oil when you pushed all your money in on a bluff bet. Maybe, but you couldn't have known that. It was the third time in a row that you did it, debated Shane. You can't run the same bluff that many times without getting called on it. I still say you cheated, and I'm saying I didn't. I just outplayed you. You know what? I'm tired of hearing about the great Harvey Shane. I hear the players talking about you all the time. Oh, let's get in the game with Harvey Shane, is what they all say. Well, I'm tired of hearing it. I don't think you're that good at poker, and I don't think you're as good as they say with a gun either. Uh-oh. That last mistake cost you $5,000, but this one will cost you your life. Like I said, I don't believe you're that fast, scoffed Halprin as he moved his hand closer to the butt of his pistol. Now you pay me the $5,000 you owe me, and I'll ride back out of town and forget all about how you cheated me. I'm afraid that's just not going to happen, sighed Shane as he slipped his hammer strap off. Then it's time for you to do your dance with the devil, Halprin said as he inched his right hand closer until his palm rested lightly on the butt of his pistol. Shane turned a little more to his right, moving his left side forward more to make himself a smaller target. His left hand moved into place just below the butt of his pistol. Jess kept his right hand in position, but only as a precaution. He had no vested interest in the gunfight, not knowing the facts about the argument over the money. But if Halprin killed Shane and turned toward him without holstering his pistol, he would be ready to defend himself. Jess looked past Shane and Halprin to see Shadow standing on the boardwalk, watching the two men. His ears were pinned back and his front fangs showed through his parted lips. Halprin's right hand flashed into action. It jerked his pistol out of his holster, thumbing the hammer back as he started leveling it at Shane. He jerk-fired the trigger as the slug from Shane's pistol smacked into the right side of his chest. His shot went wild and slammed into the dirt street as he twisted sideways and to his right. His pistol dangled from his right index finger as he slowly righted himself. Shane cocked his pistol again. Halprin looked at the crimson blood pumping out of the hole in his chest. His eyes slowly lifted to see Shane standing there calmly. You rotten sumbitch, wheezed Halprin. You done took my money and now you took my life. I didn't take anything, Rudy. You simply got outplayed once again, declared Shane. Halprin stiffened, flipped the pistol around in his hand, and attempted to thumb the hammer back, but he never finished the movement. The second slug from Shane's pistol whumped into Halprin's forehead, causing his head to snap backward, followed by his body as he fell on his back in a loud, dusty thud. His fingers slowly released their grip on the pistol as he took his last breath on this side of the living. Shane immediately replaced the spent shells in his pistol and holstered it. Jess walked off the boardwalk and over to the dead body while the marshal waved to some men to come and haul it to the undertaker's parlor. Did you cheat him out of the money like he claimed? Jess asked as he looked at Shane. Does it matter now? Certainly not to him, he said as he towed the body. Then why do you want to know? If you're going to ride alongside me, I need to know what kind of man you are. Shane flashed him a quick smile. You already know what kind of man I am, he said, as he looked deeply into Jess's eyes for a long moment. I'm going to get my horses ready and supply up at the general store, said Jess, as he broke his gaze away. I'd suggest you do the same. He headed for the hotel and retrieved the things from his room. He walked out and toward the livery. Shadow came up and walked next to him. I guess you're staying with me for a little while longer, Jess asked without looking down at the wolf. Shadow barked once and rubbed against his leg. He saddled his horse and walked them to the saddled his horses and walked them to the general store. He purchased the supplies he needed and packed his saddlebags full, while Shadow ate the chunk of meat he'd given him. He was finishing with packing when Shane rode up on his horse. I supplied up yesterday, so I'm ready to ride off if you are, he said as he watched Shadow finish the last of the meat. Jess climbed up in the saddle and turned his horses out of town. Shadow followed alongside Sharps. When they turned on a trail that led toward Texas, Jess put the horses into a slow gallop, with Shadow running alongside Sharps. Shane looked curiously over at Jess. So, does the wolf always ride with you? He asked. No, only when he thinks I might need help. You mean he actually knows that you're hunting for two men and you might need help? No, he's staying because he doesn't know you well enough yet. So he's watching me? Yep. Really? Really. And we're at chapter 22. We'll stop there. It's a good book. I do like it. All right, guys, that's all I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed the read. Just checking to make sure we didn't have any more comments. I'm going to pray us out, and I will see you on Friday at 4:30 for the Nurse Penny podcast, and we'll go over the news of the week, and maybe we'll have a Trump verdict by then. That would be interesting. That would be the New York trial with Alvin Bragg. That's the Stormy Daniels one. So jury got their instructions this morning. We'll see. I mean, I can't imagine. Today's Wednesday. I just can't imagine it's going to take them that long to come up with a decision, but we'll see. If they've got a holdout, which one of the fellows or one of the people, I don't know if it's a man or not, on the jury was, I guess, voted for Trump or follows Trump on media or something like that. So we'll see where it goes. I've kind of set my heart on that they're going to indict him, or not indict him, but they're going to find him guilty. Just because it's New York, and I think everybody else on the jury is, liberal leaning or Democrat leaning. So we'll just see where that goes. Hopefully we'll have some news by Friday. That would be really nice. But that's all we've got. And we'll close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day and for everybody who watched the show and everyone who will watch on Rewind. We especially want to thank you for Cecile, I never know how to say her name, Cecile, in her happy news that prayers were answered. And we know that prayer does matter. And we just thank you so much that you give us a way to come to you and ask for the things that we need and the things that other people need. And that you are a God that provides and shows up. And that is just such a wonderful blessing to us. And we thank you so much for that. Most of all, we thank you for your son, Jesus. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. All right, guys, I love you whole big bunches. I will see you on Friday. Nurse Penny out.